President Trump is cracking down on crime in our nation's capital. Welcome in, everybody. I'm John Bachman, in for Greta Van Susteren, and this is The Record. Earlier today, President Trump announcing that he is placing D.C. under federal control.
Under the authorities vested in me as the President of the United States, I'm officially invoking Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act. You know what that is? And placing the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department under direct federal control. In addition, I'm deploying the National Guard to help reestablish law, order, and public safety in Washington, D.C., and they're going to be allowed to do their job properly. The murder rate in Washington today is higher than that of Bogota, Colombia, Mexico City, some of the places that you hear about as being the worst places on earth, much higher. This is much higher. The number of car thefts has doubled over the past 5 years, and the number of carjackings has more than tripled. Our capital city has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged-out maniacs and homeless people, and we're not going to let it happen anymore. We're not going to take it.
White House correspondent Mike Carter joins us live now with more details on the president's announcements. Good evening, Mike.
Hey, good evening, John. We also heard from D.C.'s Mayor Muriel Bowser this afternoon responding to the president today, announcing that he's enacting Section 740 of the Home Rule Act of 1973. That essentially ceded control of Washington, D.C. from Congress and gave it to the city council and mayor of Washington to run the city. President Trump says this is something that's needed, that federalization of Washington's police force has to be done. The mayor of D.C., though, not so much.
Crime isn't just down from 2023, it's also down from 2019, before the pandemic, and we're at a 30-year violent crime low, and we continue to look for ways to make our city safer. My message to residents is this: we know that access to our democracy is tenuous. That is why you have heard me and many Washingtonians before me advocate for full statehood for the District of Columbia. We are American citizens. Our families go to war. We pay taxes and we uphold the responsibilities of citizenship.
Well, President Trump says Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, will now take control of D.C.'s Metropolitan Police Department immediately. Trump also says he's declaring a public safety emergency in the district and will deploy up to 800 National Guard troops to help reestablish law and order and public safety in Washington. This ahead of the president's meeting with Vladimir Putin on Friday.
And it's embarrassing for me to be up here. You know, I'm going to see Putin. I'm going to Russia on Friday. I don't like being up here talking about how unsafe and how dirty and disgusting this once beautiful capital was, with graffiti all over the walls. It's another part of it, by the way, because we're talking about safety, but we're also talking about beautification. We have the most beautiful, potentially, capital in the world. We always had. But people come from Iowa, they come from Indiana, they come and then they get mugged. Not going to happen. Keep coming, because by the time you get your trip set, it's going to be safe again.
And Trump says those 800 National Guard troops, John, will begin flowing into the streets of Washington this week. This is, we're learning, recent statistics of Washington showing the city's murder rate over the last several years surpasses major cities around the world, as Trump said, like Baghdad and even Mexico City. In an accompanying executive order today, the president writing that the deployment shall remain in effect until I determine that the conditions of law and order have been restored in the District of Columbia.
At your direction this morning, we've mobilized the D.C. National Guard. It'll be operationalized by the Secretary of the Army, Dan Driscoll, through the D.C. Guard. You will see them flowing into the streets of Washington in the coming week. At your direction as well, sir, there are other units we are prepared to bring in. Other National Guard units, other specialized units. They will be strong, they will be tough, and they will stand with their law enforcement partners. This is nothing new for DOD.
Well, John, not everyone is happy about criminals being removed from the streets here in Washington, homeless encampments being removed from public parks, including some protesters outside the front gate of the White House this afternoon.
criminal in the White House, I want him out.
What about the violent criminals on the streets of Washington?
I want that criminal.
But the criminals on the streets,
I want
the people harming people, like physically harming people on the streets of Washington. Do you want them to leave?
He is and
I get how you feel about him, but what about the people on the streets?
You
shouldn't destroy Washington.
How is it destroying it by putting federal police officers on the streets?
Cleaning it up by plowing over a rose garden, by making people afraid.
But that's not what we're talking about.
We're talking about East Berlin, circa 1930s.
And today, John, the president calling on cities like Chicago and New York and even Washington, D.C. to do away with no cash bail. The president wants Congress to step in now and remove cashless bail from the law here in Washington, saying that, look, the Democrats, they're just weak on crime. John?
Well, Mike, you always find the most interesting people, I think, right outside the White House there. Mike Carter for us live tonight. Thank you, Mike. Let's welcome in White House reporter for Politico, Daniel Littman. He joins us now. Daniel, good to see you. During President Trump's announcement, he also showed that chart that Mike talked about for murder rates in Washington, D.C. Let's listen to him explain it.
Red is a place called Washington, D.C. Look at these. Baghdad we doubled up on Baghdad. Panama City, Brasilia, San Jose, Costa Rica, Bogota, Colombia, heavy drugs. Mexico City, I mentioned, Lima, Peru, all double and triple what they are. So do you want to live in places like that?
Not great, and this seems to kind of fly in the face of the information we heard from the mayor today.
Yeah, I think what we didn't hear from Trump is any talk of cities in red states like New Orleans or Memphis, Tennessee, which have similar crime rates to D.C. And we also heard from Mayor Bowser that she was defending her city and she was saying that it's not a hellscape, that it's actually a very nice city and it's gotten much better from the 1970s and 80s. And she also said that those added security officers on the streets could make things better for average citizens coming to visit the city or living in D.C. So it wasn't all bad news from Bowser. And she has placed a very delicate line because she doesn't want to oppose Trump too much publicly to make sure that she can keep her power and not get further diminishment from what he did today.
Now, Daniel, you mentioned New Orleans, you mentioned Memphis. They are in red states, yes, but the mayors and a lot of the elected officials that run those cities, New Orleans and Memphis, are Democrats. So, I mean, there's an underlining theme here when it comes to these cities. The Democrats are the ones who support the no bail efforts. They're the ones that support these sanctuary city policies. So you can't just say they're in red states and expect that to gloss over this information that you do see higher crime rates in Democrat-run cities.
Yeah, I think this is a problem that Democrats have to face, and they have to make sure that they are supporting the police. Right now in D.C., Trump said they have plenty of police, but the union has long said in the last few years that they have a shortage of police, that they need hundreds more officers, and that there is a sharp police recruiting shortage because people don't want to join the police if they're going to get criticized. And so I think in terms of Democrats running these cities, that's been a major issue, especially since COVID. People no longer always want to live in the cities, and they want to go to suburbs, they want to go to Florida, other places that don't have these types of criminal issues.
Yeah, people want to feel safe. I mean, that is the number one priority for any government, local, state, or federal. You got to make your constituents feel safe, and I don't think, people feel that way in Washington, D.C., at least not those that we saw at the podium today. Now, Daniel, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, we heard from him as well. He says the National Guard troops will be out, quote, flowing onto the streets in the coming weeks. We saw how effective they could be in Los Angeles, even though local officials didn't like it there. Do you think we'll see the same thing in Washington?
I don't think we're going to see a dramatic crime fall because a lot of this stuff is at night and there are gangs. This is a decades-long problem in D.C. I will say that it's not going to affect the many D.C. residents in a practical way, the federalization of the D.C. police force. We'll have to actually see if there are any real-world impacts. Are they allowed to arrest more people? Are they going to do more overtime to get control of the city? But as someone who lived in D.C., it's a fairly safe city. This is not as dangerous as Trump points it out. I think what we have seen is a reaction to Edward Korestein, who is the nickname Big Balls, who worked for Doge. He was attacked in an attempted carjacking a week and a half ago. And I think he's made a big impact in terms of, I don't think this announcement would have happened without that regrettable and violent attack on him.
Well, we also saw a congressional staffer who was murdered in Washington, D.C. And yes, there are parts of the Capitol that are very safe, parts where a lot of tourists go. But you get out of those little bubbles, and it does feel dangerous just to walk the streets. I do think, I'd push back a little bit on what you said about the National Guard. If they are out on the streets, a lot of the crime that we're seeing is coming from minors, people that are 14, 15 years old, don't know where the parents are in these circumstances. And I imagine those kids are going to be intimidated and probably won't act up if there's actually authority on the streets to keep them in line. I also want to talk about the fact that President Trump is removing the homeless encampments from Washington, D.C. And Daniel, I'm sure you've seen this. You and I have been to the Newsmax office right there, very close to there. You see a lot of people who are homeless. A lot of them are obviously, mentally unsound, talking to themselves. This is a risk not just for them, but also for everyone else in the area. And I think this is going to be a net gain for everyone in Washington, D.C. to get these folks off the street and hopefully into a place where they can get the help they need.
Yeah, President Trump was pretty sympathetic towards these people to make sure that they do get help, that it's not a humane way to just have them roving around parks, living in tents, that trying to get housing for them. But what we don't want to do is just move them to Maryland or Virginia. Then you're going to have Maryland and Virginia representatives calling Trump and say, hey, we don't want this problem shifted to our locations. And so this is a very hard problem in terms of homelessness in these major cities. And we have seen ever since they closed those mental health hospitals in the 70s and 80s, people with mental illness, they find their ways on the streets. And so I think that there's a lot of work for Trump to do in terms of partnering with Bowser to make sure that these people get the help they need, get on their feet, and do not pose as an eyesore to residents and tourists.
Yeah, local jails and prisons became the kind of de facto mental institutions for those people. A lot of them were released during COVID because of the overcrowding in these facilities. And I think, a lot of people agree with that, Daniel, that there needs to be some sort of, facility where these folks can go. We got to leave it there, though. Daniel Lippman, thanks for being with us from Politico. We'll talk soon. A federal judge has denied the Justice Department's request to unseal grand jury materials in the Ghislaine Maxwell criminal case. Maxwell, a convicted sex offender, is serving a 20-year prison sentence for aiding and participating in a sex trafficking ring run by her one-time boyfriend, Jeffrey Epstein. In his 31-page decision, U.S. District Judge Paul Engelmeyer said the public would learn virtually nothing new from unsealing the documents and would, quote, come away feeling disappointed and misled, end quote. Let's bring in former federal prosecutor Joseph Moreno. Great to have you here with us.
Hey, John, good to be with you.
First, give us your take on Judge Engelmeyer's decision.
Not surprising. I think we think of our government as a very transparent one, and it is. But in instances where that butts up against people's privacy rights, and grand jury investigations are typically sealed. It's because we don't go investigating people and then just dumping those records out in the public domain unless they're charged with something. So for individuals who are victims or individuals who may have been questioned or given information but weren't actually facing criminal charges, they all have privacy rights. And our system is not meant to just release that information to the public domain. So it's not surprising that the judge found this way. It's helpful that she said, look, there's nothing really in there anyway that would be very interesting to people, but the default is that these kinds of records should remain sealed, so it's not surprising that she left it that way.
Yeah, well, the judge criticized the DOJ's rationale for unsealing these documents as well as the process by which they went about it. The judge says the department failed to include any of the prosecutors who handled Maxwell's 2021 trial. Why don't you think the DOJ included these prosecutors in this process?
Well, it's a very delicate one. This is a very unusual kind of request. And I think the Justice Department was in really a bind because on the one hand, they're running up against a practice where you keep these records sealed. And on the other hand, they're being pressured to be as transparent as possible. And so I feel like they're threading this needle, and whichever way they come out, people are going to be unhappy. So I think the safer approach is to keep these kinds of things sealed. You set a precedent that if you start dumping investigation files in this case, why wouldn't you release them in any other case at this point? So I think, again, this is a safer outcome. People might feel misled. People might feel unsatisfied, but that's the way the system works.
Yeah, I mean, the anticipation about these files has been building for a long time. It's something that Republicans and Democrats have both now talked about getting them out there. And I was particularly struck by the judge's rationale saying that the public would never be satisfied based on what's in these materials. Now, Judge Engelmeyer also said the grand jury materials do not identify anyone other than Epstein or Maxwell as having had sexual contact with a minor. And, you think this information would be enough to satiate the public's interest in this a little bit. Do you think they'll finally start to give up on, their desire to have this information out publicly?
I hope so. I mean, this case has been on way longer than it should be. Unfortunately, it's kind of gotten a life of its own. I think one thing, though, that's often overlooked, not just the fact that the Trump Justice Department is trying to get as much public as possible, but if you recall, it was the Trump Justice Department during his first term that actually charged Jeffrey Epstein. And then when Epstein killed himself, the Trump Justice Department charged Ghislaine Maxwell. That's not the action of an administration that's trying to hide something. So I think the Trump administration, both the first and now this current one, has been very transparent, has brought this case to light as best it could. And so I think for some people who are going to complain, they'll complain no matter what. But I think it's done all it possibly can to show it's willing to reveal as much as possible.
From your lips to everyone's ears, hopefully that message gets out there. And, I haven't watched MSNBC or CNN in a couple days, but they sure were pushing that narrative, and maybe they'll give up on this as well. I don't know, but they don't have much else to talk about these days. Joseph Moreno, great to have you with us. Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Coming up, a deadly explosion at a major U.S. steel plant. We'll have details on the blast in Pennsylvania when the record continues.
From the moment Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, Newsmax was there.
We have some major breaking news. Israel launches strikes, preemptive strikes, almost 4 in the morning.
Israel has decided enough's enough.
What happened tonight was inevitable.
Well, something just caught my attention it sounds like afterburners overhead.
Reporting multiple explosions across the capital, Tehran.
I'm in a shelter now. There's 6 of us.
Benjamin Netanyahu has come out to make a statement.
Our fight is not with you. Our fight is with the brutal dictatorship. We have risen like lions to defend ourselves.
Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon.
Whenever the biggest news breaks, Newsmax is there for you because we're real news for real people. When Rosa Parks stepped on that Montgomery, Alabama bus on December 1st, 1955, she didn't set out to make history. She just wanted to get home. Montgomery's segregated buses had divided seating, white passengers in front, colored passengers in the back. When the bus driver needed more seats for his white passengers, he ordered her and 3 others to vacate their seats. The others complied and moved, but Rosa quietly refused and was quickly arrested. Working alongside Dr. Martin Luther King, Rosa's arrest sparked a highly effective citywide protest with African Americans boycotting city buses. Rosa's protest and resulting boycott didn't end segregation, but it sparked a movement that ended the racial system, paving the way for a more equal society. You're watching An American Moment.
You hear the same voices.
Donald Trump knows that's a lie.
From the same people.
Donald Trump is less lucid.
Saying the same thing.
Insults, invective, and outright lies.
And you say, enough! I'm Chris Salcedo, and I'll tell you the real news. You don't believe me? Just tune in.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above, from the mountains to the prairie.
Well, did you see this? There was a major rescue operation earlier today at a U.S. steel plant in Pennsylvania. An explosion at the plant caused people to be trapped under the rubble. Dozens were injured, and at least one person was killed. The blast happened just before 11 a.m. local time in the town of Clairton, which is about 15 miles south of Pittsburgh. Heavy black smoke was seen in the sky, but it's still unclear what caused the blast. The plant is one of 4 major U.S. steel plants in Pennsylvania. Thousands of people are employed there. Democratic Senator from Pennsylvania John Fetterman called the explosion absolutely tragic and vowed to support steelworkers. Now to the Middle East, and a journalist and crew working for Al Jazeera were killed in Gaza, but Israel says the journalist named Anas al-Sharif was a Hamas terrorist. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is pushing ahead with his plans to seize control of Gaza City. The plan was approved by Israel's security cabinet on Friday. The prime minister defending his actions in a news conference on Sunday, despite international concerns and the concerns from his own people about what will happen to the remaining hostages still being held in Gaza. Senior correspondent John Huddy is in Tel Aviv, and he has more now. John?
John, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a press conference for foreign press, including Newsmax, on Sunday, really with 2 main goals. 1, to counter the false narratives against Israel, and 2, to maintain the point that Israel does not want to annex Gaza, but instead, he said, free it from Hamas. The Prime Minister's presentation included slides showing the 5 principles for concluding the war, of which I reported about Friday, the remaining Hamas strongholds that the IDF will, in its final push, aim to take control over, Gaza City, the central camps of Gaza, and the effort to dispel the false media narratives that are, as the Prime Minister explained, maligning Israel, and summed up in one final slide that was shown, open your eyes to Hamas's lies. Prime Minister Netanyahu said the timeline for taking control of Gaza will be done, quote, fairly quickly, though he stopped short of giving an approximate timetable. And the IDF also said it is still completing a general outline for the plan and how many troops will be needed. We've heard it could take upwards of 5 months and as many as 5 IDF divisions. The Prime Minister also outlining efforts in conjunction with the U.S. and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation to designate safe transportation corridors for aid delivery, safe distribution points and more distribution points, and also ongoing continuous airdrops. But the other big problem in Israel for the government and the IDF is dealing with, and hence yesterday's press conference, the information war that continues to rage. It's a question that I asked the Prime Minister about.
You talked about the 7-front battle. There's an 8th front, the propaganda war, the information war. Is Israel winning or losing this war?
The propaganda war? Well, look, no. I think that we've not been winning it, to put it mildly. I think there are vast forces that are arrayed against us. Among other things, the algorithms of the social network that are driving a lot of everything else. And we also have to stand up and tell the truth, probably at greater frequency than we're doing now. That's exactly what I'm trying to do now. But again, if you want to win this war, end it speedily. End it speedily. Expose the lies as much as you can. End it speedily, and that's how you win the war. You win the war, the propaganda war, by winning the war and winning the peace. That's the simplest way to do it. And it's about time to do that.
I also asked Prime Minister Netanyahu if he had spoken with President Trump since the Security Cabinet approved the new Gaza plan on Friday. He said that he had not. However, late Sunday night, just after 10 p.m., we received a note from the Prime Minister's office saying that the 2 leaders did indeed speak, the details of which, though, we have not received as of yet. As we talk about the ongoing information war as well, Israel is taking flack for a strike by the IDF on Gaza City that killed a reported 7 people, 4 of which were said to be journalists, specifically journalists for Al Jazeera. However, the IDF says one of them, Anas al-Sharif, was the head of a Hamas terrorist cell who is also posing as a journalist for Al Jazeera. The IDF writing that, quote, a press badge isn't a shield for terrorism. But make no mistake, John, this is only fueling the ongoing information war. John?
John Huddy for us in Tel Aviv. Thank you, John. Well, as you heard, the war in the Middle East is heating up again. Israel has recently called up over 400,000 reserves, and reports indicate it will invade soon to rescue the hostages and to eradicate Hamas once and for all. Some say this new war is imminent. You need to tune in to Newsmax's special program at 5 p.m. Eastern Time for Carl Higby's Frontline. Carl is in Israel all week reporting on these breaking news developments. He will also be meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee. So tune in this week at 5 p.m. For more information, go to Newsmax.com. Coming up, President Trump gives a lesson on the art of the deal.
How do you know that? Because that's what I do. I make deals.
The deal he wants is with Russia. We'll show you what is on the table with Vladimir Putin this week. That when the record continues.
This morning at 7 a.m., the union representing those who man America's air traffic control facilities called a strike. This was the culmination of 7 months of negotiations between the Federal Aviation Administration and the union. At one point in these negotiations, agreement was reached and signed by both sides, granting a $40 million increase in salaries and benefits. This is twice what other government employees can expect.
On any given day, 45,000 aircraft carrying an estimated 3 million people crisscross the skies of America. Controlling those flights, an estimated 14,000 air traffic controllers working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, serve as the traffic cops of our airways, guiding those planes safely from point A to point B. Air traffic controllers are constantly required to make real-time life and death decisions, making it one of the world's most stressful professions. But on August 3rd, 1981, their stress levels were upped a notch.
That I must tell those who fail to report for duty this morning, they are in violation of the law, and if they do not report for work within 48 hours, they have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated.
In that one action, the 11,345 traffic controllers who ignored the president's threat were fired. Although initially the nation's air traffic was restricted, FAA supervisors, non-striking controllers, and military controllers were recruited to fill in for the strikers until their positions could be permanently filled. President Reagan, a former leader of a labor union himself, surprised many by his strong response to the controller strike. Some believed his actions set the stage for his more confrontational approach with both a Democratic Congress and foreign adversaries like the Soviet Union. Around the world, leaders began comparing Reagan to Harry Truman, praising him for his tenacity of drawing a line in the sand and sticking to it. You're watching An American Moment on Newsmax TV.
Big news! Newsmax just went public on the New York Stock Exchange and listed on the big board. Millions of Americans like you are joining our news revolution. Reuters Institute says Newsmax is one of the top 12 news brands in America. 40 million Americans go to Newsmax all the time, and its audience grew 50% since the same time last year. Millions really are making the switch to Newsmax. If you want to be a Newsmax share owner, call your broker advisor or get more info at newsmaxinvest.com. Stand with Newsmax today for a strong America.
Real heroes.
Real conflict.
Real threats.
Real heart.
Now there's a place America gets its news.
Newsmax. We're real news for real people.
Millions are turning off the old channels
and switching to Newsmax, the fastest growing cable news channel in America.
No agenda,
no spin,
just the facts.
Millions watch us, so can you.
Newsmax. We are real news for real people.
Welcome back. President Trump wants to make a deal with Russia. The president is set to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin this week on American soil. The two leaders will meet Friday in Alaska. You're probably aware that the Russians sold Alaska to the United States in 1867 for $7.2 million. The Russians were financially tapped out at the time after losing the Crimean War to the British, the French, the Ottomans, and the Kingdom of Sardinia. It was a great deal for us, not so much for them, and Putin, you can be sure, is still upset about it. That's one of the reasons why he took back Crimea in 2014. Anyway, today, President Trump previewed his summit with Putin while speaking to reporters at the White House.
I'm going in to speak to Vladimir Putin, and I'm going to be telling him, you got to end this war, you got to end it. And he wasn't going to mess with me. This war would have never happened You know, we had a discussion about it one time, and we never had that discussion again. Would have never happened. And when the election was rigged, and then Biden took office, which was barely took office, the auto pen took office, bad things started happening. Bad things, stupid things were said, and it ended up in a war. And you know, and I don't believe this will happen anymore because I have that pretty well covered. This could end up in a third world war. This could have been a third world war. I don't think that's going to happen now. But I thought it was very respectful that the president of Russia is coming to our country as opposed to us going to his country or even a third-party place.
Well, as of right now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is not invited. However, Zelensky and Trump, along with the leaders of NATO and the EU, have been invited to a virtual meeting which was organized by Germany. Those talks would happen right before the Putin-Trump summit. Let's welcome in our panel to talk more about this. Retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General Blaine Holt is with me. Also retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Darren Gobb is here as well. Darren, great to have you here. Blaine, great to see you as well. Let's talk about this, and I'm going to resist the urge to talk about the Crimean War and the parallels to today. Very tempting, but let's focus on the task at hand, and that is this meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. This is the first time they've met in person since 2018. There's been a lot of phone calls, Blaine. Does this summit between these two leaders on Friday suggest that we are close to a deal to end the war?
It really does. And I'm going to force you to go back to your example. There's a lot of symbolism by using Alaska. And the reason that is because, yes, the Russians were tapped out with the Crimean War in 1867. But at that point in time, you could say that America and Russia were at the high water mark in their relationship, even better than post Gorbachev and Reagan work at the end of the Cold War. And so President Trump, my understanding from my own sources, is going to be planning on a Russia trip later on in the year. And the normalization of relations between the top two nuclear powers is good. They would not be meeting if the contours of a deal, a final deal to get this war to end, was to stop. But the Europeans, which have been an impediment to President Trump's efforts, show no signs of stopping now. They and President Zelensky still have their hearts set on more war, more weapons, more money, and we're approaching the 2 million mark in those killed in this war. And so I think President Trump, let's have a steady week. We will get to the end of this, and we'll look at a deal that will be very hard for anyone to refuse.
Darren, we saw how talks imploded very publicly when Zelensky visited the White House back in February. President Trump and President Putin are both tenacious, both nationalistic leaders who want to bring back victories to their home country. What might happen during these talks with Putin if they are unsuccessful?
Well, yeah, John, if they are unsuccessful, then what you're going to see is Putin continuing to do what he's already doing now. He'll punish the majority of Ukraine in order to make sure that he secures the eastern side of the country, as well as making sure that any discussions in the future basically say that there's no way he can't own Crimea, because that's been the reality, frankly, for over a decade anyways. So Putin doesn't have a lot to lose unless this maximum pressure campaign on Russia takes the economic turn with sanctions and things that Trump has been talking about and actually has an effect on their economy. Outside of that, I think the unfortunate thing would be that this war would just continue to drag on. And if you drag on even a few more months from now you're in the winter and things over there change significantly. I think it could end up lasting a lot longer than any of us would ever like.
Yeah, one of the things we heard from President Trump today, he called out one of those Russian tank commanders who made a strategic error by going into an area that flooded, and kind of joked about the fact that we might not hear from that tank commander again. But General Holt, when it comes to Germany, they want Zelensky and Trump to meet, and they want Zelensky to be part of this. There's also talk, and there has been talk for a long time, about Ukraine becoming a representative or a member nation of NATO. We know that's a non-starter for Vladimir Putin, so we can probably take that off the table, right?
Yeah, you've got to take the military realities on the ground into account. What's left of the Ukrainian army, they're so manpower short. Listen, they're a valiant army, and we should all hold Ukraine high in our prayers and the Ukrainian people for withstanding so much. But but honestly, they've been misserved by a Europe that thinks it has the ability to repulse an unlimited quantity Russian army, and for Europe now to say, well, yes, we've said that we're not going to have any diplomacy, and we've boycotted diplomacy for 3 years, but now we want a seat at the table, and then President Zelensky has codified into the Ukrainian constitution that he can't talk to President Putin, and that they can't do a deal. That is actually counter to what we're trying to get done here. I think once it's laid out that the Russians are going to stop at the point of Russian-speaking peoples inside of Ukraine, and that Ukraine might end up with its own seaport, even in light of the fact that Russia could continue militarily despite the economic damage, I think we're going to see the end of this thing. And there's going to be a lot of upset politicians in Europe, because how are they going to explain this to populations about why it was worth it to de-industrialize their own countries, wreck their own economies, not get cheap Russian gas to get to this place?
And let's be honest, there'll be a lot of disappointed American politicians too, especially those that fly the Ukrainian flag here. And at a certain point, though, based on what we just heard from General Holt, Darren, I mean, Volodymyr Zelensky has got to understand the lack of leverage he has in this situation. And to retain a warm water seaport, not lose that to Russia, to only lose the Russian-speaking territories to Russia, I mean, you know, he's got to understand there are limitations to what he can push for here, right?
He absolutely does. And the two key words that Blaine mentioned there are military reality. Neither side necessarily has to like what's going on, but the reality becomes the fact that Russia is winning. And if this thing drags on, they could take a whole lot more of Ukraine, even up to the Dnieper River, if they chose not to stop. So Zelensky needs to recognize the fact that he's risking losing a whole lot more if he doesn't sign off on something that makes sure they don't lose everything in just what you described. That's the unfortunate reality of all this. Yes, Ukraine has done a great job in battling an army that is much bigger than it, and the world has stood in awe of what they were able to do. But at this point now, they really have the rest of the nation to save and do the best they can with the reality on the ground.
Blaine, do you think there's a chance that in these negotiations that Donald Trump can extract any type of restitution from Russia to pay for the damage that Vladimir Putin has done to Ukraine, specifically how intent he has been about targeting civilian areas in the capital city of Kyiv and other places?
I do. There's a lot of levers that go back and forth. So the Russians are going to be very interested in the locked up assets that they've had both in the United States and Europe. They want access to that. And on the other side, the territories that Putin purports to lock down and keep, well, that's the worst damage, and he's got to rebuild that bar none, plus the Kiev piece, Lviv, Odessa. It's in their best interest to take a hand in that rebuilding because the battle scars are going to remain for hundreds of years, but Russia and Europe need each other economically right now. There is no question about that.
Yeah. And again, we could go back to the Crimean War analogy here. Again, so many parallels, but everyone should look at a map and check out how crucial this is. And it would be a massive win, Darren, for Vladimir Putin to get that warm water port. Real quickly, 30 seconds. If he has that, if it's no longer contested, if you force Europe and everyone else to kind of hold their nose and go along with this, Vladimir Putin can go back to Moscow and claim victory, which is exactly what he wants.
That's the biggest trophy on the table for Russia, and it has been for a very long time. Catherine the Great wanted it and got it, and it's gone back and forth. And if he can do that, yeah, he'll be engraved in the walls of Russia for as long as Russia lives.
Yeah, as odious as that sounds to many people, it might be enough to stop the killing right now in Ukraine. Gentlemen, great to have you both here today. Brigadier General Blaine Holt and Lieutenant General Darren Gobb. We'll see you guys soon.
Take care.
Thanks, John.
Well, two Chinese ships crashing into each other today. The video is pretty wild. Check it out. Here's what happened. A Chinese Coast Guard ship and a Chinese Navy destroyer were chasing a Philippine Coast Guard ship. And then this is crazy stuff here. The chase was happening in the disputed waters of the South China Sea. The Philippine ship was escorting fishing vessels. China accused the Philippines of ignoring its warnings and forcibly intruding into the area. The Chinese Coast Guard ship then ended up attempting to make a risky maneuver, and they missed the Philippine ship and then hit its own Navy ship. The bow of that Navy ship was damaged, as you just saw there, and you can see the metal all mangled up. It's not clear if anyone was hurt, but this type of stuff happens all the time in those hotly contested waters. Well, coming up, President Trump is deploying the National Guard. Where will you be? Or you'll be here with us, I guess, watching The Record when we continue after this.
It was called the War to End All Wars, but instead it only served as a prelude of worse things to come. It was the world's first universal war, with the nations of the United States, United Kingdom, France, Greece, Italy, Russia, and 19 other countries declaring war on Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, Germany, the Ottoman Empire, and the other European-based nations. As the wars before it, and those after it, this war would prove to be a long, bloody, and costly conflict. For the first time, chemical weapons were used in organized warfare. In 1915, the Germans unleashed 150 tons of chlorine gas at Ypres, Belgium. Then 2 years later, used mustard gas against the Russians at Riga. World War I also gave birth to a new form of battle called trench warfare. Opposing armies would build elaborate trenches opposite one another, protected by barbed wire. The trenches themselves became havens for disease and life-threatening infections due to poor drainage and sanitation. The area between the opposing armies became known as no man's land because it was fully exposed to artillery and small arms fire from both armies. Attacks, even if successful, often sustained severe casualties for both sides. So when it finally came to an end, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, soldiers from both sides greeted the news with great skepticism. Neither side dared to let themselves believe their long nightmare had finally come to an end, leaving an estimated 8.5 million people dead and some 21 million wounded. The actual peace document, known as the Treaty of Versailles, was not signed until 6 months later, on the 28th of June, 1919. Although the face of the civilized world had forever changed, 21 short years later, history would again repeat itself. For Newsmax TV, I'm Bill Curtis, and this is an American Moment. When Rosa Parks stepped on that Montgomery, Alabama bus on December 1st, 1955, she didn't set out to make history. She just wanted to get home. Montgomery's segregated buses had divided seating, white passengers in front, colored passengers in the back. When the bus driver needed more seats for his white passengers, he ordered her and 3 others to vacate their seats. The others complied and moved. But Rosa quietly refused and was quickly arrested. Working alongside Dr. Martin Luther King, Rosa's arrest sparked a highly effective citywide protest with African Americans boycotting city buses. Rosa's protest and resulting boycott didn't end segregation, but it sparked a movement that ended the racial system, paving the way for a more equal society. You're watching An American Moment.
Well, if you were with us on Friday, you may have seen that breaking news we brought you. We have an update for you on that shooting at the CDC headquarters in Atlanta. The officer who was shot and killed while responding to the incident has now been identified. He's 33-year-old DeKalb County Sheriff or Police Officer David Rose. Authorities have also named Patrick Joseph White, a 30-year-old Georgia man, as the deceased gunman. White was armed with multiple weapons and was found dead at a nearby CVS pharmacy. Police say he ran across the street into the CVS after being denied access to the CDC headquarters. It is unclear whether he was killed by police or if he killed himself. Police say White's father contacted police to identify his son. He also told them that his son was a vocal critic of the COVID-19 vaccine, claiming that it made him depressed and suicidal. Well, today, HHS Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr. visited the CDC in Atlanta following the shooting. Some staffers at the facility have said that they felt more at risk due to JFK Jr.'s previous skepticism of the vaccine. Well, coming up, hunting enthusiasts might have some good news coming out of Florida. What the state might allow soon, that when the record continues.
Christened on January 29, 1944, by the daughter of future President Harry S. Truman, the USS Missouri was our country's last great battleship and rapidly became the pride of the American Navy. On the 11th of April, 1945, she was attacked by a kamikaze pilot who crashed his aircraft into her starboard side, causing minor damage, which can still be seen to this day. The Missouri's commander, Captain William N. Callahan, ordered the pilot's body to be recovered so he could be buried at sea with full military honors. Serving with distinction throughout the Great War and beyond, it seemed only fitting when General of the Army Douglas MacArthur chose her as the site of the Empire of Japan's unconditional surrender. On the day of the signing, September 2nd, 1945, General MacArthur put little trust in his former adversary, so as a precaution, he ordered over 1,000 Allied combat aircraft to fill the skies over Tokyo Bay as a warning to the Japanese. Should they be planning anything but complete and unconditional surrender, retribution would be swift and complete. With her decks filled with sailors and soldiers alike, Supreme Allied Commander Douglas MacArthur began the ceremonies. He took his pen and handed it to General Jonathan Wainwright. Wainwright was touched. He had stayed on in the Philippines during the 1941 Japanese invasion, survived the Bataan Death March, and spent 4 years in a Japanese POW camp. A new long peace between Japan and America had begun. Big Mo, as she was affectionately known, permanently dropped anchor in Pearl Harbor on January 29, 1999, and opened as a museum, forever commemorating the site where America's involvement in World War II began and where it ended. For Newsmax TV, I'm Bill Curtis, and this is an American Moment.
Big news! Newsmax just went public on the New York Stock Exchange and listed on the big board. Millions of Americans like you are joining our news revolution. Reuters Institute says Newsmax is one of the top 12 news brands in America. 40 million Americans go to Newsmax all the time, and its audience grew 50% since the same time last year. Millions really are making the switch to Newsmax. If you want to be a Newsmax share owner, call your broker advisor or get more info at newsmaxinvest.com. Stand with Newsmax today for a strong America.
At 9:47 a.m. on the 20th of February, 1962, Lieutenant Colonel John Glenn Jr. of New Concord, Ohio, found himself sitting on top of an Atlas 6 rocket filled with 600,000 pounds of fuel. At liftoff, 360,000 pounds of thrust hurled the massive rocket and its occupant into space and America's history books. John Glenn became the fourth human being to enter space and the first American to orbit the Earth. For his remarkable heroism, President Kennedy awarded Colonel Glenn NASA's Distinguished Service Medal.
As our knowledge of this universe in which we live increases, may God grant us the wisdom and guidance to use it wisely. Thank you, Colonel.
Glenn went on to become the United States Senator from Ohio, and in 1984 ran for the Democratic presidential nomination, but lost to Walter Mondale.
The National Guard is coming to D.C. Earlier today, President Trump announced that he is deploying the National Guard across Washington. The president also says he's taking over the city's police department, all in the hopes of reducing crime in our nation's capital. Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner for Ward 5 in Washington, D.C., Kathy Henderson joins us now. Kathy, it's great to have you here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, since you live in Washington, D.C., we'd love to get your take on President Trump's decision to federalize the district.
God bless President Trump. I sat on this show back in 2023 imploring the mayor and Congresswoman Norton to work together and the D.C. Council to activate the National Guard. And I circulated a petition. Citizens signed that petition, and we fervently requested some help with our law enforcement partners to secure the district from seemingly unrelenting crime. And today is a beautiful day, and I just want to thank President Trump for representing all of his constituents, all of us, regardless of party. This isn't a partisan issue. This is a public safety issue, and we are really, really happy.
Well, since you mentioned Muriel Bowser, I'd love to get your reaction to how she responded to President Trump's decision today. Let's take a listen to that.
While this action today is unsettling and unprecedented, I can't say that given some of the rhetoric of the past, that we're totally surprised. I believe that the president's view of D.C. is shaped by his COVID era experience during his first term. And it is true that those were more challenging times related to some issues. It is also true that we experienced a crime spike post-COVID, but we worked quickly to put laws in place and tactics that got violent offenders off our streets and gave our police officers more tools, which is why we have seen a huge decrease in crime because of those efforts. We have been able to reverse that 2023 crime spike.
Mayor Bowser says crime is down.
Crime is down, but one crime is too many. One carjacking is too many. One armed robbery is too many. One sex assault is too many. We have to make sure that when we're talking about public safety, that we're not using words like rhetoric, and we are working together. We need the leadership to cross party lines and to make sure that they work together and support the president's efforts to keep us all safe. So I'm not sure. I can't speak for the mayor. I can only speak for the people I have represented, the people I talk to every day. And there's a problem in the city. Yes, we've had a 26% reduction in crime, but it's not enough. It's not enough. We need to do everything possible to make sure that we protect our residents and our visitors to our nation's capital. And the president's actions today ensures that can happen.
Anyone following this story closely knows there's also an issue with crime statistics, and D.C. commander of the police department's under investigation for allegedly flubbing the numbers. We'll follow that carefully. But I also wanted to ask you about the juvenile crime in Washington, D.C., something else President Trump addressed today. Take a listen.
Juvenile offenders and crimes against persons, as they say. It's getting worse. Not getting better, it's getting worse.
Kathy,
President Trump is correct. That's the $24,000 question. Where are the parents? The juveniles are adjudicated under the Office of the Attorney General. So that process is very closed, and for good reasons. We want to make sure that young people who are misguided, who are committing all these crimes, that they have an opportunity to grow up and be productive citizens. But where are their parents? Where are their caregivers? I have been calling on our Office of Attorney General and Mr. Schwab to make sure that parents and adults accompany these young people when they face the judge in family court.
Yes.
This is just unacceptable for so many juveniles to just be out of control. It is the adult's responsibility to rein in children, to provide proper safety, proper guidance, proper boundaries, to demonstrate appropriate law-abiding behavior. And that's not happening. We had an event at Rosedale Recreation Center, which just turned out to be just a public safety it turned out to be something that it was not intended to be. Juveniles, so many juveniles showed up. They were out of control.
Yeah,
they were throwing rocks at the police. It's just unacceptable.
It is unacceptable. Kathy, thank you for joining us this evening. Kathy
my
Henderson
pleasure.
from Washington, D.C. It was great to see you. Great to hear from you.
My pleasure.
Well, some news for hunters in Florida. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission is set to vote this week on a final plan that will allow the hunting of black bears in December. If it passes, it would be the first legal bear hunt in that state in a decade. Fish and wildlife officials say the hunt would help tame the bear population. Currently, there are more than 4,000 bears across the state. That's up from 1,200 in the 1990s. If that current rate holds up, the state will soon run out of habitat for them. Critics, however, say hunting bears is cruel and violates the state's environmental laws, but these guys are not afraid to move into human territory. Coming up, it pays to be ugly. We'll explain what that means next.
I'm Michael Savage, and I was conservative before conservative was cool. Do you realize how crazy the liberals in this country have become? I do. You want to get me started today? I'll get started. Watch Michael Savage and the Savage Nation every Sunday night.
Born on April 22nd, 1822, in Point Pleasant, Ohio, the future General of the Army and 18th President of the United States would also become one of America's greatest heroes. At age 17, young Ulysses S. Grant entered West Point and went on to graduate 21st in a class of 39. Still, Grant found little opportunity in the Army and left in 1854. Living a life of near poverty as a farmer and leather salesman. But once the Civil War began in 1861, he joined the Union Army and quickly rose through its ranks. After defeating the Confederates in Vicksburg and putting the Union in control of the Mississippi, Grant led the effort to gain control of Chattanooga. Once again, he scored a victory, earning President Lincoln's admiration, calling him a man who could fight. On March 2, 1864, Lincoln promoted Grant to Lieutenant General in charge of all Union armies. Grant would spend the next 13 months battling General Robert Lee through Virginia, finally cornering him at Appomattox. There, Lee surrendered, ending the bloodiest war in American history. A veritable war hero, U.S. Grant, as he was called, won the presidency in 1868. As president, he led Reconstruction in the South, created the Department of Justice, and even ordered it to vigorously prosecute the Ku Klux Klan. He was also an outspoken supporter of women's suffrage and designated Yellowstone as our nation's first national park. After leaving the presidency and suffering from cancer while financially in trouble, he worked with his friend writer Mark Twain to write his memoirs. Within days after finishing his writing, with his family at his side, Grant died from throat cancer in this cottage on Mount McGregor, New York, on July 23, 1885. He was just 63, and yes, he was buried in Grant's tomb, a mausoleum located in Manhattan's Upper West Side. Following his death, the memoirs of Ulysses S. Grant were a huge success, the royalties of which, in today's dollars, earned his family more than $13 million. You're watching An American Life on Newsmax TV.
It took 34 years to build, but on August 15, 1914, the Panama Canal was officially opened for business and was quickly crowned one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. President Theodore Roosevelt believed the completion of the canal was essential to American security and prosperity, so he negotiated with the French to purchase the canal's properties and dredging equipment. But when negotiations with Colombia over a canal treaty broke down, Roosevelt backed a local bloodless revolution that lasted only a few hours. And on November 3, 1903, the nation of Panama was born. With the opening of the Panama Canal, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans were joined, reducing a ship's journey from New York to San Francisco by 9,000 miles. Roosevelt's vision made the canal a reality, and the feat helped make America a world power. You're watching An American Moment.
The world's ugliest dog has just been crowned. Meet Petunia. She is a hairless French bulldog mix from Oregon. She beat out 9 other competitors at the Sonoma County Fair in California. On your screen here are some of the other contestants as well. Dogs came from across the country to compete for the title and the cash prize of $5,000. Thanks for watching. Raj Schmidt tonight.
People think news just happens. It doesn't. It happens because there's someone there to capture the moment, to explain it and share it. That's my job. I go where news breaks and give you the facts. Join me for The Record on Newsmax.